The roar of Jake, ironclad, Sullivan's motorcycle echoed through the empty parking lot, vibrating the cracked concrete beneath his boots. It was a typical Saturday afternoon for him. Just him, the open road, and his gang of Black Reapers, out looking for trouble. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the chill in the air or the dust swirling in the breeze. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. He'd been speeding down the highway for hours, feeling that familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. But now, the high had worn off, and he found himself parked next to an abandoned lot on the outskirts of town, idling his engine, just looking for something to kill the time. That's when he saw it. A scruffy, golden retriever wandered into the lot, its coat matted with dirt and its eyes wary. It looked like any stray dog, thin, tired, and desperately in search of food or shelter. Jake squinted, sizing the creature up. He didn't have much patience for weak things, dogs included. The dog was slow, dragging its paws across the cracked pavement as it sniffed around. It seemed harmless enough, just a sad, wandering soul with no place to go. But to Jake, it was just another chance for a laugh. Another thing to kick around and feel better about himself. The kind of thing that made him forget about the mess of his own life for a few minutes. He swung his leg over the bike, his heavy boots thudding against the ground. The dog glanced up at him, sensing the danger but too slow to react. Jake smirked as he walked toward it, the sound of his boots echoing through the empty space. He could almost hear the dog's heart racing, feel the tension building in the air. But he didn't care. It was just a stupid mutt. "Hey, you little piece of junk," Jake said, his voice a low growl. Without warning, he kicked the dog, hard, in the side. The dog yelped and stumbled, its body crumpling to the ground. The sound echoed in the empty lot, sharp and painful. Jake laughed, the sound harsh and grating. It felt good, powerful. In that moment, the anger that had been building inside him all week, hell, all his life, flooded out. The dog whimpered, trying to crawl away. But Jake just watched, his boots digging into the dirt as he stood over it. He didn't care. That's when he noticed something strange. A sleek, black car had pulled into the lot from behind, its tinted windows blocking the view of the driver. But what caught Jake's attention wasn't the car. It was the way the door opened. Slowly, carefully, and the man who stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who carried an aura of wealth and power with him, even in this dump of a parking lot. Jake squinted, his pulse picking up a little. There was something about the guy that looked familiar. But before he could put it together, the man's gaze locked onto him. And for a brief, terrifying moment, Jake felt the weight of that stare. It wasn't the usual kind of look he got from people. It wasn't fear or disdain. It was something deeper. Something that said, "You don't know who I am, but you're going to regret this." Jake felt his chest tighten, a flicker of uncertainty rising up, but he quickly shoved it down. "You got a problem," he spat. The man didn't respond immediately. He just knelt down next to the dog, gently stroking its head, murmuring something to it as the creature whimpered in pain. His voice was calm, measured, as though he were trying to soothe an old friend, not a frightened stray. Jake's stomach turned. What the hell? The man stood again, wiping his hands on his jacket, his expression darkening. For a second, Jake thought he saw something shift in the man's eyes. A flash of recognition, maybe. Or was it anger? Before Jake could figure it out, the man spoke. "That dog belongs to me," the man said quietly, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Jake froze. What the hell is this guy talking about? He could feel the challenge hanging in the air, thick and palpable, but he couldn't figure out why it felt so serious. He had kicked a dog, sure, but that wasn't anything new. He'd kicked worse things in his life. He'd hurt people for fun. So why did this guy's words feel like a threat? The man's next words hit like a ton of bricks. "His name is Max, and you're going to regret this." Jake opened his mouth to retort, to laugh it off. But before he could say another word, the man climbed back into his car, slammed the door shut, and drove off, leaving Jake standing there, his boots sinking into the dirt, staring after him. For a moment, Jake didn't know what to do. He looked down at the dog, Max, he thought he heard the man say, and felt a strange pang of guilt. It was fleeting, gone almost as soon as it appeared. He was used to doing things like this. It was the way of the world, right? Only the strong survive. But something about the man's words kept echoing in his head. Max belonged to him. But who was that guy? And why did he act like Jake had crossed some kind of line? The moment of doubt passed quickly, and Jake shook his head, walking back to his bike. He revved the engine, the growl of the machine filling the air. The thrill of power, the feeling of control. He needed that back. He wasn't going to let some stranger ruin his day. Still, as he pulled out of the lot, a strange unease lingered in the pit of his stomach. What happens when you cross paths with someone you least expect? Would you stand up for a helpless creature, even if you didn't know the full story? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jake Sullivan had always been the type to make his presence known. His nickname, Ironclad, wasn't just a reflection of his rugged persona. It was a symbol of the walls he had built around himself. Those walls had been constructed long before the Black Reapers had ever come into the picture, long before he ever threw a leg over a motorcycle and let the roar of the engine drown out the sound of his thoughts. Jake had grown up in the kind of neighborhood where survival meant learning to fight, not just physically, but emotionally. His father had been a mechanic, a gruff, no-nonsense man who never spoke much, but when he did, it was usually about fixing something, or about the ways the world had let him down. His mother had been a ghost, always disappearing into the haze of alcohol, never fully present in his life. She died when he was 16, and that had left a mark deeper than anything his father could fix with a wrench. The early years of Jake's life were a series of disappointments and shattered expectations. He'd been a quiet kid, always watching others instead of participating, but he quickly learned that silence could get you hurt in a place like that. It wasn't long before he adopted the mindset that if you didn't break first, you get broken. And in his world, broken people didn't get second chances. His first taste of real power had come when he enlisted in the military. For the first time, he was someone, part of a team, part of something bigger than himself. But it wasn't long before that life fell apart, too. His unit was deployed on a mission that went horribly wrong. There had been gunfire, explosions, and a lot of screaming. When it was over, Jake was the only one left standing, bloodied, bruised, and alone. He came back to civilian life with the weight of that mission on his shoulders, haunted by memories of his fallen comrades, and carrying a burning resentment for the world that seemed to have no place for him anymore. That's when he found the Black Reapers. The gang wasn't anything like the military, but it gave him a sense of belonging. It gave him something to focus on, a way to numb the pain in his chest. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but on the back of his bike, with his brothers in leather beside him, he didn't have to think about what he'd lost. He could just let the world burn, one reckless decision at a time. At first, the Black Reapers had been a family of sorts, an escape from his past. The gang offered camaraderie, a brotherhood bound by mutual respect and shared chaos. They drank, fought, and lived for the next thrill, the next ride. But it didn't take long for Jake to realize that power came with a price. To stay on top, you had to be ruthless. You had to dominate or be dominated. And Jake wasn't about to let anyone take that from him. He'd hurt people before, some just for fun, some because they crossed him. He learned that strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about control. He liked the fear that he could instill in others, the way people would step aside when they saw him coming. It made him feel invincible, like nothing could touch him. But deep down, even he couldn't ignore the ache that gnawed at him. That ache had started when he was a kid, the feeling that something important had been taken from him, that he was forever trapped in a cycle of loss and revenge. It was a hunger that would never go away, no matter how much he drowned it out with alcohol or violence. Jake was sitting in his usual spot at the bar later that evening, nursing a bottle of whiskey when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Daryl, the Black Reaper's second-in-command. "Heard you got into it with a dog today." "What the hell, man?" Jake let out a sharp laugh, taking a long swig from the bottle. He had to admit, the question surprised him. Normally, Daryl would be the one egging him on, not questioning his actions. But this time, there was something in Daryl's tone, something that felt different. He typed back quickly. It was just a damn dog. No big deal. A few seconds later, another message from Daryl popped up. No, I'm serious. People are talking. I heard someone saw you kick it, said it was some fancy billionaire's dog. Jake's thumb hovered over the screen. Billionaire's dog? What the hell did that mean? He chuckled darkly, tossing the phone on the table. It didn't matter. A dog was a dog. Rich guy or not, it wasn't like the dog could do anything about it. But a nagging feeling settled in the back of his mind as he sank further into his thoughts. Who would care about a dog like that? Why had the man been so protective? It wasn't like Jake had kicked some kid in the street. It was just a mutt. He'd done worse. Still, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Back at his small apartment, Jake sprawled out on the couch, the TV flickering in the background. His mind kept wandering back to the guy in the parking lot, the one who had claimed to own the dog. There was something about him, something different. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, or the look in his eyes when he'd spoken. But there was no way Jake could have known who he really was. He didn't run in those circles. And yet, there was a weird sense of inevitability creeping into Jake's gut. He'd kicked that dog, no question. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be as easy to shake off as he'd hoped. His phone buzzed again. People are starting to make connections. Be careful. It was from Daryl again. Jake sat up, suddenly feeling the weight of his actions. Was it really just a dog? Or had he stepped into something far bigger than he ever expected? The next few days were a blur of tension, unease, and the constant hum of Jake's motorcycle engine as he rode from one meaningless stop to the next. His usual routine, hitting the bar, catching up with the gang, blowing off steam, felt hollow, like he was just going through the motions. He couldn't shake the image of that man's eyes, the way he'd stared at him after Jake had kicked Max. You're going to regret this. The words echoed in his head, over and over again, like a broken record. It didn't make sense. Why would some rich guy care about a dog so much? Hell, Jake had hurt worse things in his life without batting an eye. But something about the way that man spoke to him, like he knew Jake's every move before he made it, unnerved him. Who the hell was he? Jake tried to focus on the mundane things that used to keep him distracted. He met up with Daryl and a few other Reapers at their regular hangout. But even there, in the dim light of the bar, with the laughter and the clink of bottles, Jake couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was closing in on him. What's with you, man? Daryl asked, slamming a beer down in front of Jake, his voice cutting through the fog in Jake's mind. Jake looked up, blinking. He'd been staring into his drink, trying to drown out the sense of discomfort crawling through his veins. What do you mean? You're acting all weird. Ever since you kicked that dog. You feeling all right? Daryl leaned forward, his brow furrowing. Jake scoffed, slamming his bottle on the table. I'm fine. Just tired of the same old crap? Daryl shot him a look, clearly unconvinced. You've been more irritable than usual. You sure it's just about the dog? Jake's temper flared. Was everyone obsessed with this stupid dog? It wasn't like he'd killed the thing. Hell, he hadn't even drawn blood. I told you, Jake growled, his voice low and cold. It's just a damn dog. Who cares? But deep down, even Jake wasn't buying it. Something in his gut told him this wasn't over. He just couldn't figure out why. The unease followed him home that night, a creeping chill that settled in his apartment like an unwelcome guest. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dog, lying in the dirt. And then that man, the way he'd spoken with such authority. That strange feeling in the pit of Jake's stomach told him the man wasn't just anyone. He was somebody powerful. Somebody with resources, connections. Maybe even the kind of person who could ruin Jake's life if he really wanted to. A few days later, Jake found himself at a stoplight, his fingers gripping the handlebar of his bike, his mind still restless. The engine rumbled beneath him, a low growl that vibrated through his chest. He looked down at the pavement, the reflection of his helmet flickering in the oily surface of the street. As the light turned green, Jake accelerated, his bike roaring to life as he shot forward, weaving between cars. For a brief moment, the familiar rush of the ride felt good again, like it was pushing away the nagging feeling that had been growing in the back of his mind. But just as quickly, a black sedan pulled into his lane, cutting him off. Jake slammed on the brakes, his tires screeching against the asphalt as the car slowed down, forcing him to a stop. He barely managed to stay upright, his heart hammering in his chest. What the hell? He looked up, his eyes narrowing behind his helmet. The car's windows were tinted, and he couldn't make out the driver. The car came to a stop right in front of him, and the door opened slowly. Jake didn't need to see the man's face to recognize him. The tall figure, the dark jacket, the way he moved. It was the same guy from the parking lot. "You again?" Jake muttered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his revving engine. The man stepped out of the car and slowly approached Jake, his eyes never leaving him. There was no anger in the man's gaze, no fury. It was something colder, something more controlled. "Thought you'd be smarter than that," the man said, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "You've made a big mistake, Jake." Jake felt his throat tighten, his heart rate spiking. This wasn't just some random encounter. It wasn't just a coincidence. "What do you want?" Jake spat, his jaw tightening. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope, tossing it onto the ground between them. Jake bent down, picking it up, his fingers trembling slightly as he ripped it open. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper with a picture. A photo of the dog, Max, lying in the lot after Jake had kicked him. But it wasn't just a picture. It was a note, typed in bold letters. "This is just the beginning." Jake's stomach dropped. He stood up, fists clenched. "What the hell does that mean?" The man took a step back, glancing at the bike before meeting Jake's eyes again. "You don't want to find out," he said coolly. Then, without another word, he turned and got back into his car. Jake stood there for a long moment, the words ringing in his ears. This is just the beginning. A flash of anger surged through him, but there was something else too. Fear. It was small, buried beneath the rage, but it was there. He wasn't used to feeling afraid. He wasn't used to being threatened. Not like this. Whoever this guy was, whatever his connection to Max was, Jake had made a dangerous enemy. As the man's car disappeared down the street, Jake's mind raced. He had a lot of questions, and not a lot of answers. All he knew for sure was that things had escalated from a stupid act of cruelty to something much darker. And this time, Jake wasn't sure if he'd be able to ride away from it. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his world had just shifted on its axis. Everything felt different now. The air was thicker. The quiet hum of his bike, the sound that usually calmed him, now made his skin prickle with a strange sense of urgency. He needed answers. Fast. The man, the one who'd claimed Max the dog as his own, wasn't just some random guy with too much time and too much money. Jake could feel it in his bones. There was something more to him, something beneath the surface. He had threatened Jake, and that was something Jake never took lightly. Jake peeled out of the parking lot, speeding through the streets with a new purpose. His mind was racing, running through all the possible connections, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Who was that man? And why the hell was he so invested in some stray dog? He could hear Daryl's voice echo in his mind, reminding him that people were starting to make connections. Jake wasn't sure what that meant yet, but the threat felt real. And it was all tied to that damn dog. The bike's engine roared beneath him as he navigated the streets, making his way to the usual hangout, the Black Reaper's clubhouse. It was a gritty, run-down building on the edge of town, surrounded by old warehouses and overgrown weeds. It was the perfect place for a gang that thrived on the outskirts of society, a place where Jake could escape from everything, until now. As Jake parked his bike in front of the clubhouse, he saw Daryl leaning against the door, his arms crossed. There was something in Daryl's posture that told Jake the man had heard about the incident with the dog, and that Daryl was waiting for an explanation. "You look like hell," Daryl said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Jake didn't reply right away. Instead, he pulled off his helmet and ran a hand through his unkempt hair. He hadn't been able to think straight since that encounter with the man in the parking lot. Something about the way he had looked at Jake, like he already knew who Jake was and what he'd done, stirred a cold fear deep in his gut. "Got a problem, man?" Jake said, trying to sound casual, but it was clear to Daryl that something was off. Daryl pushed off the door, stepping closer. Heard you kicked a dog, Jake. A rich guy's dog. Words spreading around. Jake's jaw tightened. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, a mixture of anger and frustration. I didn't kick the dog, Daryl. He paused. The memory of the dog's pitiful whimper flickering in his mind. Messed with it. But now it's turning into something bigger, and I don't know what the hell's going on. Daryl raised an eyebrow. Something bigger? Like what? You got some rich guy threatening you over a mutt? Jake didn't know how to explain it. It was more than that. There was something about the way the man had spoken. So controlled, so calm, like he was in complete control of the situation. And when the man had said, "You're going to regret this," Jake had felt the weight of it, like a promise or a curse. Yeah, Jake muttered. Something like that. I'm not sure what yet, but it doesn't feel like something I can shake off. Daryl's eyes narrowed, and he took a step back, sizing Jake up. Listen, man, I know things haven't been great lately, but this ain't the kind of thing you want to escalate. We mess with people like that. It's gonna end badly for all of us. You don't want to cross the wrong people. Jake clenched his fists, frustration rising. He didn't need a lecture. He needed answers. And if this was as bad as it felt, he needed to be ready for whatever was coming next. I don't know who that guy is, Jake said, pacing in front of the clubhouse. But he's not just some random rich guy. There's something off about him. Something dangerous. Daryl let out a heavy sigh. I'll say this once. You don't mess with people like that. Rich people, they got connections. And they don't just let things slide, especially not when you're messing with what they care about. Jake was already lost in thought, his mind running through possible scenarios. Was this some kind of mob connection? A business magnate? Whoever the hell this guy was, he wasn't just some random millionaire. And Jake wasn't about to back down. What's his name? Jake asked suddenly, his voice sharp. Daryl frowned. What? The guy. The one with the dog. What's his name? Jake repeated, his eyes locking with Daryl's. Daryl was quiet for a moment, his eyes flickering toward the door of the clubhouse, like he was weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. His name's Elon Musk. Jake stopped dead in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. Elon Musk. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd heard the name before, of course. Who hadn't? The tech mogul, the billionaire innovator. He was everywhere. The founder of Tesla, SpaceX, and God knows how many other companies. He was the kind of man whose name carried weight. The kind of man whose reputation made people nervous. Jake's brain raced. Elon Musk wasn't just a rich guy. He was one of the richest men in the world. The kind of man who could buy anything. The kind of man who could ruin someone's life on a whim. Elon Musk? Jake repeated, his voice disbelieving. The Elon Musk? The billionaire? Daryl nodded slowly. Yeah, that's the guy. And you've made an enemy of him over a damn dog. Jake's mind spun. He had no idea how or why this man, a tech mogul of all people, would care about a stray dog. But something told him that this was just the beginning of a storm that was about to hit him with everything it had. And Jake didn't know if he was ready for it. What would you do if you found yourself facing off against someone with that much power? Would you back down or fight till the end? Drop a comment below and let us know what you do in Jake's shoes. Jake spent the next few days in a daze. Elon Musk. The name echoed in his mind like a warning bell he couldn't unhear. Every time he tried to focus, tried to push the whole mess with the dog to the back of his mind, that name would crop up again, like a shadow, stretching longer and darker with each passing hour. It was almost impossible to avoid the implications of what had just happened. He hadn't just kicked some random dog. He'd done it to Elon Musk's dog. Jake didn't know what to do with that information. What was he supposed to do when the world's most famous billionaire had just decided he was worthy of attention? He'd messed up before, plenty of times, but this was a whole different level. He tried to drown out the nagging thoughts with alcohol, slamming whiskey shots down his throat, but it only numbed the surface. The deeper fear, the one gnawing at his chest, kept creeping back, reminding him that he was in over his head. The day the real trouble started, Jake wasn't expecting it. He was riding his bike across town, heading for his usual spot in the back alleys where he liked to be alone, just to clear his head when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't normally pick up calls while riding, but the number on the screen made him pause. His gut told him it was someone important, someone who might have answers to the whirlwind he was caught in. He swerved to the side of the road and killed the engine, pulling off his helmet as he answered the call. "Jake Sullivan," he said, his voice gruff. "Mr. Sullivan," came the voice on the other end. Smooth, confident, almost too perfect. It was a man's voice, but the tone wasn't one Jake had ever heard before. There was a precision to it, like the speaker had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Jake tensed. "Who's this?" The man didn't answer right away, and when he did, it was like he was savoring the moment, drawing it out. "This is Elon Musk. We need to talk." The world stopped. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as the words hit him like a punch. Elon Musk. The real Elon Musk. Jake gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles turning white. "What the hell do you want from me?" Elon's voice was calm, almost too calm. "I think you know why I'm calling." Jake took a deep breath, trying to hold on to some semblance of control. But the fear creeping up his spine told him this was no longer just about a stupid mistake. This was something bigger than him, something that could take him down if he didn't tread carefully. "I'm listening," Jake said through gritted teeth, trying to sound unaffected. "I think you owe me an explanation," Elon continued, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You've hurt something that's very dear to me. Max wasn't just a dog. He was—" Elon paused, and for a split second, Jake could almost feel the weight of his words, like the entire world was waiting on this moment. He was family. Jake's stomach tightened, and the words felt like a slap. He didn't care about the damn dog. But now, hearing the raw emotion in Elon's voice, something shifted inside him. It was impossible to ignore the weight of what he'd done. He had hurt someone. "You think I kicked your dog for fun?" Jake asked, his voice rough. "It was a mistake. I didn't know who the hell you were, or who the dog belonged to. I thought it was just some stray." Elon's laugh was cold. "Do you think that makes a difference? That you didn't know? You went out of your way to harm something that didn't deserve it, Jake. And I don't take that lightly." Jake stood silent, his anger starting to simmer beneath the surface. He didn't care who Elon Musk was. No one talked to him like that. "All right, fine. I made a mistake," Jake spat, his voice growing louder. "But what do you want from me now? You think I'm gonna apologize for kicking a damn dog? Get over it, man. It's not like I killed it." "Not yet," Elon said, his voice suddenly softer, but still edged with something that sent a shiver down Jake's spine. "But it's not about the dog, Jake. Not anymore. You've crossed a line with me, and I need you to understand this. I can be as ruthless as anyone. I can ruin you, in ways you don't even understand yet." Jake's chest tightened, and he felt a knot twist in his gut. The air seemed heavier now, the world outside his helmet muffled, like he was drowning in the words that Elon had just spoken. "Ruin me?" Jake echoed, his voice barely a whisper. "How?" There was a pause, and for a moment, Jake wondered if Elon was done with him. But when Elon spoke again, it was like a final verdict, like he was sentencing Jake to something far worse than any physical punishment. "All it takes is one phone call, Jake. One wrong move, and I'll make sure you lose everything. Your freedom, your reputation, your life as you know it." Elon's words were icy, each one like a dagger to Jake's chest. The world works differently when you have the right leverage. And believe me, I have plenty of it. Jake felt like the ground was slipping out from under him. His heart pounded in his ears as he gripped the handlebars of his bike for support. "This is your warning," Elon continued, his voice now firm and final. "You don't want to find out what happens if you ignore me. Understand?" Jake was silent. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't know what kind of man he was dealing with, but something told him that this was no ordinary billionaire. This was a man who could make the world bend to his will. Finally, Jake muttered, "I understand." The line went dead. Jake stood there for a long moment, staring at the phone in his hand. The words rang in his head, repeating like a mantra. "You've crossed a line. I can ruin you." He felt sick, like he'd just stepped into a trap that he couldn't escape. What had he done? But more than that, there was a sinking feeling in his chest. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about a dog at all. This was about power and control, and the dark side of the world Jake had never understood. The hours after the phone call felt like they dragged on forever. Jake could barely breathe. Elon Musk, the man whose name was synonymous with power, innovation, and unyielding control, had just threatened him. And for what? A stupid decision made on a whim? A single act of cruelty that, in hindsight, seemed so insignificant compared to what Jake was facing now. But it wasn't just about the dog anymore. The more Jake thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about revenge for Max. This was about control. Elon had seen something in Jake, something that made him a target. And now, Jake had a decision to make. Fight back or back down. He stared at the dim light in his apartment, pacing back and forth. His mind was a storm of thoughts, none of them clear. Jake's life had always been one of defiance. He was the kind of guy who didn't take orders. He didn't bow to anyone, not even when the odds were against him. The Reapers respected that. He'd built a reputation, earned his place in the world. But this was different. This wasn't some rival gang or an angry ex. This was Elon Musk, a man who could crush him without even breaking a sweat. Later that night, Jake met Daryl at the same bar they'd always gone to, the Rusty Spur. The clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation didn't do much to dull the tension that gnawed at Jake's insides. He needed answers. He needed someone to tell him what to do. Daryl was already there when Jake walked in, sitting at the corner booth with a drink in his hand, staring at the half-empty glass like it held the secrets of the universe. "Jake," Daryl greeted him, his voice calm, but there was a subtle edge to it. He knew something was wrong. "You're looking like a man who's seen a ghost." Jake didn't sit down immediately. He paced in front of the booth, trying to gather his thoughts. "Daryl, you were right. This isn't some ordinary mess," Jake said, his voice low. "This guy, Musk, he's not playing games." Daryl raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Jake could see the wheels turning in his head, but he didn't wait for Daryl to ask the question. "I got a call from him today. It's worse than I thought." Jake sat down across from Daryl, his face drawn, eyes shadowed with the weight of the conversation. "This isn't about the dog. It's about power and control. He has the means to ruin me and everyone around me if I make one wrong move." Daryl let out a slow breath. "Well, that's the thing, isn't it? You mess with people like him, they don't just walk away. They make you pay." Jake slumped back in the booth, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "What the hell am I supposed to do, Daryl? I can't just back down. But if I fight him, I don't even know where to start." Daryl leaned forward, his eyes hardening. "You got options, Jake. But the question is, are you willing to play the game? The rich, powerful, they don't give a damn about rules. They make their own. If you want out of this, you might have to think bigger than your bike and your buddies." Jake's stomach twisted at the thought. "And what does that mean exactly?" "It means you start looking at this like more than just a personal grudge," Daryl said, his voice even, but with an undertone of something deeper. "You get into the wrong crowd, Jake, and this won't just be your fight anymore. It'll be the Reaper's fight, and that's not something you want. You'll drag everyone down with you." Jake looked away, his gaze falling on the worn wood of the bar. The more he thought about it, the more he realized Daryl was right. Elon Musk wasn't just a rich man with a vendetta. He was a powerful figure, connected to a world Jake didn't understand. A world where the rules were different. A world where a man like Jake could be swallowed whole if he wasn't careful. But something in him still refused to bend. This was his life, his choices, and no one, not even Elon Musk, was going to control him. "I don't care what happens," Jake said, his voice hardening. "I'm not backing down. This is my fight now, and I'll take it to the end if I have to." Daryl sighed. "Just be careful, man. People like Musk don't play fair." The next few days blurred together in a whirlwind of planning, phone calls, and uneasy conversations. Jake wasn't just afraid of what Elon Musk could do to him. He was terrified of what Musk could do to everyone he loved. His friends, his family, the Reapers. If Musk was really as ruthless as he seemed, he could take everything away with a single phone call. Jake knew he needed help. He couldn't face this alone. But help from whom? The Reapers? They were good for a fight, but they weren't connected to the kind of world Elon Musk lived in. No, Jake needed someone else, someone who could understand the kind of game Musk was playing. That's when the idea hit him. Jake spent the next couple of days researching, reaching out to old acquaintances, and making phone calls to people he thought he'd never have to call again. He wasn't proud of it, but desperation had a way of making people do things they wouldn't normally consider. And he was desperate. Finally, after several frustrating attempts, Jake found what he was looking for. A man named Liam Stokes, a former tech industry insider who had worked in the same circles as Elon Musk years ago. Liam had walked away from that world, leaving behind all the money and power. But he knew it. He understood it. And most importantly, he knew how to deal with people like Elon Musk. Jake set up a meeting with him, desperate for anything that could give him an edge. As he drove to the location, a nondescript office building on the edge of the city, Jake's heart raced. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about fighting back. When Jake walked into the meeting room, he was greeted by a man in his late 40s, tall and thin, with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority. Liam Stokes didn't say a word, just motioned for Jake to sit across from him. "You've got a problem, kid," Liam said bluntly, after a long pause. Jake nodded, unable to find the words. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This was it. Liam leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "But if you want to solve it, you need to stop thinking small. This isn't a street fight. This is a game that has to be played by different rules." Jake listened closely, his mind churning. It was time to learn how to fight back, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure he could win. The moment Jake stepped into Liam Stokes' office, he realized the full weight of what he was about to get into. This wasn't just some back alley deal. This was a calculated move, one that could make or break everything Jake had worked for. Liam Stokes was a man who knew how to play the game. And for better or worse, Jake was about to learn from him. Liam watched Jake as he sat down, his expression unreadable. The silence hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick with expectation. "So, Jake," Liam began, his voice smooth but with an edge of authority. "You've made your choice. You want to take on Elon Musk, the world's richest man, over a damn dog." He paused, studying Jake. "You know what this means, right?" Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't like the way Liam was talking to him, as if Jake had no clue what he was getting into. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized Liam was right. He didn't understand the full scope of it yet. Musk was a man who didn't just bend the rules. He rewrote them. "I'm ready," Jake said, forcing his voice to sound confident, even though his insides churned with uncertainty. "I know I'm in deep, but I'm not backing down." Liam smiled faintly. "I like your resolve. You'll need it. Because if you want to survive this, you'll have to outplay Musk at his own game. And trust me, he doesn't lose." Jake sat up straighter, his mind racing. Outplay Musk? How the hell was he supposed to do that? "I've got to warn you," Liam continued, his tone darkening. "Musk is dangerous, and not just because of his wealth. The man plays chess while everyone else is playing checkers. He's got connections everywhere: media, tech, law enforcement, even underground circles. If you think this is about a dog, you're in for a rude awakening." Jake's stomach twisted again, but he didn't flinch. "So, what do I do?" Liam leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping thoughtfully against the desk. "You're going to need leverage. You've pissed him off. That's already clear. But that's not enough. You'll need to make him think twice before he moves against you." Jake frowned. "Leverage? What kind of leverage?" Liam's eyes gleamed with something almost predatory. "Musk's empire is built on secrets. Every billionaire has skeletons in their closet, some bigger than others. Your job is to find one and use it." Jake stared at him, his mind racing. "Are you saying I need to blackmail him?" Liam chuckled softly, almost mockingly. "It's not blackmail if you've got something he doesn't want anyone to know. Think of it as a form of insurance." Jake wasn't sure what to make of that. It sounded dangerous, but Liam had a point. If Musk had a dark side, some secret that could ruin him, then maybe that was the leverage Jake needed to turn the tables. "How do I even start looking for something like that?" Jake asked, his voice tight. Liam leaned forward again, his eyes never leaving Jake's. You start small. Find the people who work for him. Find the ones who know something. Get close. And don't just focus on Musk himself. Look at the people around him. Those are the ones with access. Find someone who's been burned by him, someone who has a grudge. Jake felt the weight of the task ahead settle over him. It sounded simple enough, on paper. But Jake knew better than anyone that getting close to someone like Musk wasn't going to be easy. People like that didn't trust anyone, especially not a guy like Jake. But he had no choice. Jake spent the next week doing exactly as Liam had advised. He reached out to anyone he could find who had a connection to Elon Musk or his companies. He made calls, sent emails, and even tried to track down people who might have some insight into Musk's world. It felt like looking for a needle in a haystack, but he was relentless. The more people he talked to, the clearer it became that no one wanted to mess with Elon Musk. He was untouchable. But Jake wasn't giving up. One evening, after a fruitless round of phone calls, Jake was sitting alone in his apartment, nursing a cold beer, when his phone buzzed. He glanced down, expecting another dead-end email or a scam call, but instead, it was a message from a number he didn't recognize. I know what you're looking for. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th and Main. Midnight. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He didn't recognize the number, but something about the message felt right. This could be the lead he'd been waiting for. He grabbed his jacket, grabbed his keys, and made his way to his bike. The warehouse on 5th and Main was a place he knew all too well. A rundown building where abandoned cars and forgotten equipment were left to rot. It was the perfect place to meet someone who didn't want to be seen. When Jake arrived at the warehouse, the night air was thick with the smell of rust and oil. He parked his bike at the entrance and walked inside, his boots clanging against the concrete floor. The building was dark, the only light coming from a flickering overhead bulb that cast long shadows along the walls. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as he stepped deeper into the warehouse. He didn't see anyone at first, but then a figure stepped out of the shadows. A man in his mid-30s, wearing a leather jacket and a hood that obscured most of his face. He held a phone in one hand, his other hand stuffed into his pocket. "You Jake?" the man asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Yeah," Jake replied, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" The man smirked, stepping closer. "Let's just say I know a thing or two about Musk, and I think you're looking for something he doesn't want anyone to find." Jake's pulse quickened. This was it. "What do you know?" Jake asked, his voice steady despite the tension building inside him. The man grinned. "I know enough to make sure Musk's not untouchable anymore." Jake took a step closer, eager for answers. "How do you know all this?" The man's eyes gleamed. "Let's just say I used to work for him. And now, I'm the one who holds the cards." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. This could be the break he needed. The key to getting Musk to back off, to maybe even take the fight back to him. But Jake knew better than to trust someone who came out of nowhere with promises of secrets. He had to be careful. "I'm listening," Jake said, his voice low. "If you were Jake, would you trust someone who claims to have dirt on Elon Musk? How would you handle a situation where your life was on the line, and your only chance of survival depended on gathering information from the people who know the most? Let us know in the comments below." Jake didn't trust the guy standing in front of him, but what choice did he have? Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to not get involved with someone who had come out of nowhere claiming to have the power to bring Elon Musk down. But at this point, he was running out of options. If this guy really had something, it could be his only shot. He kept his eyes on the man, his mind processing every word. "You worked for Musk? Doing what?" Jake asked, not wanting to reveal too much of his own cards just yet. The man chuckled, a sound that made the hairs on the back of Jake's neck stand up. "Let's just say I knew Musk before he became the face of every tech company. I was in the trenches with him back when he was still learning the ropes of running a business. I know things that most people can't even imagine." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And trust me, Jake, he's got secrets. Big ones. Ones that could ruin everything he's built if the wrong people found out." Jake crossed his arms, trying to keep his cool. He couldn't let his desperation show. "And why would you help me?" His voice was even, but he could feel the tension rising. The man's eyes gleamed with something dark, almost predatory. "Because Musk is a monster," he said, as if it was the simplest thing in the world. "I watched him destroy people who didn't matter to him, people who trusted him. I can't let him keep getting away with it. And you? You're the right person for the job. You've already pissed him off. You're in the perfect position to make him bleed." Jake felt the weight of the words settle over him. Make him bleed. That was what this whole thing had come down to. Not just surviving. Not just getting out of it alive. Jake was in a war now, and if he didn't play it right, he'd lose everything. "So what's the plan?" Jake asked, his voice quiet but steady. The man smirked, his eyes lighting up with a cold fire. "We need to find the key players in Musk's world. The ones who know the real Musk. Not the billionaire CEO. The man behind the mask. There are people who have dirt, people who've been burned. And we're going to use that. First, you need to get close to the right people." Jake furrowed his brow. Get close? How? Musk's world isn't just some open-door club. The man's grin widened, as if Jake had just said something amusing. That's the beauty of it. Musk surrounds himself with people who think they're untouchable. People who think they're immune to anything that could threaten him. All it takes is one crack in the foundation, and the whole thing will come tumbling down. The plan, as it turned out, was simple but dangerous. Jake would have to infiltrate Musk's world, getting close to his inner circle. To do that, he needed a cover. Something that would allow him to gain trust and move under the radar. But that wasn't going to be easy. Musk's circle was tight-knit, and those who worked with him were loyal, at least on the surface. Jake's first move was to track down people who had worked at SpaceX and Tesla. These were the companies Musk had built from the ground up, and if there was any place where secrets might leak, it was from those who'd been burned in the process. He combed through old interviews, job boards, and social media pages, looking for anyone who had left either company under questionable circumstances. It wasn't much, but it was a start. After a few days of digging, Jake found a name. Hannah Brooks, a former PR manager for Tesla. According to her LinkedIn, she'd left the company a year ago after a personal disagreement with upper management. Jake knew that term was a red flag. Personal disagreements weren't usually the reason people walked away from jobs that high-profile. He tracked her down to a small cafe in the city, a place tucked away from the hustle and bustle, with enough privacy for two people to talk without being overheard. Jake had no idea what he was walking into, but if she knew something, anything, it could be the break he needed. The cafe was quiet when Jake arrived, the afternoon sun filtering through the windows, casting long shadows on the table. He was early, but he sat anyway, his nerves tightening as he waited. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity, but when Hannah finally walked through the door, Jake's heart skipped a beat. She was in her early 30s, with sharp features and an air of confidence that immediately made Jake wary. She didn't look like the type who would open up easily, but he wasn't here to make friends. He was here to get information. "Hannah?" Jake called out as she walked toward him, his voice low but firm. She turned, her eyes scanning him quickly, calculating. "Jake? You're the one who wanted to meet?" she asked, her tone guarded. Jake stood and nodded. "Yeah, we need to talk. I think you might be able to help me with something." He motioned for her to sit down. Hannah hesitated for a moment, then slid into the seat across from him, still sizing him up. "What's this about?" she asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. Jake didn't waste time. "I'm looking for information about Elon Musk. Something personal. Something that could hurt him." Hannah raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting that answer. "What makes you think I'd help you with that?" Her voice was steady, but there was a sharp edge to it. Jake leaned forward slightly, trying to gauge her reaction. "Because you left Tesla, didn't you? Something happened there. I think you know something about Musk that could help me. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just trying to level the playing field." Hannah's eyes flickered with something like recognition, an emotion Jake couldn't quite place. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the cafe as if weighing her options. "I don't know what you're asking for," she said slowly, her voice softening a bit. "But if you're looking for dirt on Musk, you're going to be disappointed. That man, he's got everything locked down tight. People like me, we don't have any power to take him down. If you're in trouble with him, you're on your own." Jake wasn't ready to give up just yet. He knew she was holding something back. He needed to push, but carefully. "Are you sure about that?" he asked quietly. "I've got a lot riding on this, and I'm not leaving without an answer." For a long moment, Hannah didn't say anything. Then, with a deep sigh, she looked at Jake, her eyes softer now. "All right, maybe I can help, but it's going to cost you. Information like this doesn't come for free. If you want me to tell you what I know, it's going to cost you big time." Jake wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was clear. This was the start of a dangerous game, and he was already deep into it. Jake sat in silence, processing Hannah's words. "It's going to cost you big time." The phrase echoed in his mind, but he didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. This was the only lead he had, the only person who might be willing to help him, the only person who might know something that could make all the difference in his battle with Elon Musk. "What do you want?" Jake asked, leaning forward, his voice calm but laced with urgency. He needed to stay in control, even though everything inside him screamed to just grab whatever information she had and run. Hannah took a slow breath, her fingers tapping lightly on her coffee cup. She studied him for a moment, and Jake could almost see the wheels turning in her mind. She wasn't an amateur. She knew exactly what she was doing, and knew the value of the information she was holding. "I don't come cheap," she finally said, her voice steady but with an underlying edge. "But if you really want to bring Musk down, there's a way to do it. But it's going to cost you more than just money." Jake's stomach tightened. More than money? What the hell was that supposed to mean? He glanced at her, trying to read her expression, but she was an enigma, too guarded, too calculating. "What are you talking about?" Jake pressed, his voice a little sharper now. Hannah gave him a small, almost cruel smile. "You're not just going after a billionaire CEO, Jake. You're going after a whole empire. Musk didn't get to where he is by being nice or playing by the rules. If you want to win, you'll have to get your hands dirty. And that means making some enemies. But I'm guessing that's already happened, huh?" Jake's fists clenched at the mention of enemies. He knew that getting close to Musk would mean making enemies, but he wasn't prepared for how much it would cost, how far he'd have to go. "So what's the catch?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady, despite the unease gnawing at him. Hannah looked him dead in the eyes. "The information I have, it's not just some tidbit you can throw out there. If you want to use it, you're going to have to go all the way. You'll have to expose him in a way that will destroy him completely, not just professionally, personally. I'm talking about hitting him where it hurts most." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. That was the kind of thing that could ruin lives, on both sides. "And what's the personal angle?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do you know that could bring him down like that?" Hannah paused, taking a moment before speaking. "I used to work with Musk's PR team at Tesla," she said quietly. "He's very careful about his image, how people see him. He's built this perfect, genius entrepreneur persona, right? But it's all an illusion. Behind the scenes, Musk is ruthless, manipulative, and cold. And there's one thing he's been hiding for years. Something no one knows about. Something that would shatter his public image and destroy his credibility." Jake felt a surge of excitement. This was it. This could be the game changer he needed. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low with intensity. Hannah leaned in, her face now inches from his. "He's got a family secret. Something from his past. It's buried so deep, most people have no idea it exists. But I know about it because I was once involved in managing his personal affairs. He had an affair a long time ago with someone very close to him, a family member, no less. It was kept under wraps, but it could ruin him if it got out." Jake blinked, struggling to process the magnitude of what she was telling him. A family affair? That didn't make sense. Not the kind of thing that would bring Musk down. Or would it? "Are you serious?" Jake asked, almost incredulously. "A family affair? That's what you think will bring him down?" Hannah nodded slowly, her eyes locked onto his. "I'm not talking about a casual fling, Jake. I'm talking about something much darker. This affair happened years ago, but the consequences of it, if people found out, would be disastrous. Musk has worked too hard to build a reputation as a man of integrity. This secret could completely destroy that." Jake's mind raced. Could this really be it? The thing that would turn Musk's world upside down? It was a personal scandal, sure, but it was hard to imagine a public figure like Musk being undone by something as private as this. But then again, everything about Musk's image was built on control. If this affair was exposed, it would tear apart everything he had worked for, everything he had convinced the world to believe about him. So, what do we do with this information? Jake asked, his voice thick with disbelief and something else. Hope. Hannah hesitated, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. We use it, Jake, but we have to be careful. This is not something you can just leak to the press. You'll need to make him believe you've got control over the narrative. You'll need leverage. Jake's heart started to pound again. And how do I get leverage? Hannah leaned back, her expression turning calculating once more. We need someone who can confirm this. Someone who knows the whole story. Someone who's been keeping quiet for years. Jake's eyes narrowed. Who? Hannah smiled, a cold, knowing smile. His ex-wife, Tallulah Riley. If anyone knows the truth about Musk's past, about his affair, it's her. She's the key to everything. Jake's blood ran cold. Tallulah Riley? Musk's ex-wife. Jake had read about her, of course. She was an actress and had been married to Musk twice, each time with a very public divorce. If she knew the truth about Musk's past, if she had the right kind of evidence, this could be the opening Jake had been searching for. But he couldn't just waltz into her life. Tallulah Riley wasn't someone who would just hand over a secret like that. She would need a compelling reason to talk. So, what's the plan to get to her? Jake asked, his voice hardening. Hannah's eyes gleamed with a mixture of excitement and caution. You'll have to get close to her, Jake. I can give you the contact information, but that's all I can do. The rest is up to you. Jake nodded, a sense of determination solidifying in his chest. This was the big move, the one that could bring Elon Musk to his knees. All right, Jake said, pushing his chair back and standing up. Give me the contact info. I'll handle the rest. Hannah studied him for a moment before sliding a small piece of paper across the table. Jake grabbed it quickly, glancing at the name and numbers scribbled on it. Tallulah Riley. This is your shot, Jake, Hannah said, her voice low and serious. Don't screw it up. Jake took a deep breath, slipping the paper into his jacket pocket. This was it. The beginning of the end for Musk. He could feel it in his bones. Now, all he had to do was get to Tallulah Riley. What would you do if you were Jake in this situation? Would you pursue this secret about Musk's past? Or would you back out now, knowing how dangerous it could be? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Jake could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. Tallulah Riley. The name had power. She wasn't just any woman in Musk's past. She was a key to unlocking the deepest secrets of his world. The door to everything he needed was within reach, but getting to her wouldn't be easy. Hannah had given him the contact information, but that was just the first step. Jake stood outside the cafe for a moment, looking down at the small piece of paper in his hand. He could feel the adrenaline building. This was the kind of opportunity you didn't get twice. He had to be careful, calculated. This wasn't just about taking Musk down anymore. It was about survival. The stakes had never been higher. He took out his phone and dialed the number. It rang 3 times before someone picked up. A woman's voice, smooth and cool, answered on the other end. Hello? Jake's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't let it show. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. But now that it was real, it felt different. It felt dangerous. Ms. Riley? My name is Jake. I need to speak with you about something personal. Something concerning your ex-husband. His voice was steady, but he could hear the edge in it, an urgency that he couldn't hide. There was a long pause, and for a moment, Jake wondered if she'd hung up. But then she spoke, her tone colder now, cautious. Who are you, exactly? And why would I talk to you about anything to do with Elon? Jake paused for a moment, carefully weighing his words. He couldn't afford to give too much away, not yet. But if he wanted her to take him seriously, he had to sound like he knew what he was talking about. I'm someone who knows things. About Elon. And I know you've been keeping quiet about some of the things you've seen, the things you've experienced. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just looking for the truth. And I think you're the only one who has it. There was a moment of silence on the other end. as if she was considering his words, weighing the situation. She knew the power she held, and Jake wasn't about to pretend otherwise. She could make or break him. "You're bold," Tallulah said finally, her voice still distant but less icy. "And you're right about one thing. I've seen a lot. But you'll need more than words to convince me. If you want the truth, you'll have to earn it. I don't speak to just anyone, especially when it comes to Elon. I'm not stupid." Jake swallowed, his mind racing. Earn it? What the hell did that mean? "I understand," Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm. "But I don't have time to waste. I need to speak with you, face to face. We both know how much power Musk wields. But I also know how much power you have over him." She was quiet for a moment, and Jake could almost hear her thinking. Then, finally, she spoke again. "I'll meet you, but I choose the place. And you come alone. No tricks. No games." Her voice had softened a little, but the firmness was still there. She wasn't playing around. Jake felt a rush of relief. This was it. The opportunity he'd been waiting for. He had no choice but to agree. Understood. Where and when? Tallulah gave him the details, an address, a time 2 days from now, and a promise that this conversation would be their last, should he screw it up. Then, the call ended, and Jake was left standing there in the cold, his phone still pressed to his ear. Everything was riding on this. Jake drove to the address Tallulah had given him, trying to steady his nerves. The location was a small, secluded estate in the hills just outside the city, a quiet, private place where it was easy to disappear from the world. A perfect spot for a conversation no one would hear. He parked his car at the bottom of a winding driveway that led up to a grand, yet understated, home. The place had the feel of a retreat, something tranquil, but with an underlying tension, as if it had secrets in every corner. Perfect for someone like Tallulah Riley. Jake's breath misted in the cool evening air as he walked up the long drive. His boots crunched over the gravel, the sound of each step louder than he'd expected. He felt like he was walking toward his own execution, except he wasn't sure if he was the one doing the executing, or if he was the one who would be brought down. He reached the front door and rang the bell. Within moments, the door opened, and Tallulah stood there, her dark eyes locking onto his. She was even more striking in person, her beauty untamed by any of the Hollywood filters or public images people had come to know her for. She had a quiet power about her. "You came alone," she said, her gaze flicking to the empty driveway. "Good." She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The interior of the house was minimalist, clean lines, sparse furniture, and a quiet elegance that matched Tallulah's own demeanor. She led him to a sitting room, where she gestured for him to sit. Jake obeyed, not daring to break the silence. After a long, drawn-out moment, Tallulah spoke. "You've come here looking for a story, Jake. You think you can use me to bring down Elon." Her voice was calm, but there was a sharpness in it now, as if she had seen it all before. Jake didn't respond right away. Instead, he watched her carefully, trying to gauge her next move. She wasn't someone who would just spill the truth, not unless it benefited her in some way. "Tell me what you know about the affair," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Tell me what Elon's been hiding all these years." Tallulah studied him for a long time, and just as Jake was beginning to feel the pressure of her silence, she leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. "If you want the truth, you'd better be prepared for the consequences," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because once you hear it, there's no turning back. Are you ready to pay that price, Jake?" Jake's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment that could change everything. But he didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "I'm ready," he said, his voice low. "Give me the truth." Tallulah took a deep breath, as if she were about to share something far more dangerous than Jake could possibly understand. And in that moment, Jake knew. The game had just changed. Jake sat across from Tallulah Riley, the weight of the moment pressing on him like a 1,000-pound anchor. The room felt colder now, the silence between them heavy with the knowledge that whatever she was about to reveal could change everything. The truth. That's what he had come for, and it was right there, just out of reach. Tallulah studied him for a moment longer, her eyes sharp, assessing him like a predator eyeing its prey. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. "You want the truth about Elon? Well, you've got to understand one thing first. He's not the man everyone thinks he is." Jake leaned forward slightly, his heart racing. This was it, the lead he had been chasing for weeks. He needed to stay calm, to listen, to take it all in. No matter how far it went, no matter how deep it dug. Tallulah paused, looking out the window as if the words she was about to say would pull something from the very air. She exhaled, then turned back to face him, her gaze steely. "Elon has a secret," she began, her voice low but filled with an undeniable tension. "A secret he's kept hidden for years. It's not about a mistake or a simple affair like the tabloids like to spin. It's about something far darker." Jake's mind raced. Darker? What could be worse than an affair? "Tell me everything," he urged, his voice barely above a whisper. Tallulah's expression hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line. She exhaled deeply before continuing, her voice tinged with bitterness. "It started when we were married," she said, her gaze shifting to the floor. "Elon was always obsessed with control, not just over his companies, but over every aspect of his life. He has this need to dominate, to always be in charge. But it's not just about business, Jake. He's done things, horrible things, to keep that control." Jake's stomach twisted, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. This wasn't what he had expected. This was much darker. What was she talking about? What had Musk done that was so terrible? "What do you mean by horrible things?" Jake asked cautiously. Tallulah hesitated for a moment, her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to decide how much she could trust him. Finally, she spoke again, her voice thick with a strange mix of anger and regret. "You don't really know Elon, do you?" she said, her words laced with contempt. "He's not some genius entrepreneur who just happens to make billions. He's a man who will stop at nothing to get what he wants. And sometimes, Jake, what he wants is something far worse than money." Jake felt his pulse quicken. What was she talking about? "There's a reason he's been so successful," Tallulah continued, her voice colder now. "And it's not because of his inventions or his ideas. It's because he's been willing to go to extreme lengths to crush anyone who gets in his way. He's been manipulating people, lying, and using others for his own gain. But there's something darker, something I've seen with my own eyes, that I can't ignore." Jake's mind was racing now, trying to piece together what she was saying. Manipulating people? Lying? What was she talking about? "Tell me, Tallulah," Jake said, his voice low with urgency. "What is it? What's the secret?" She looked at him, her eyes hardening as she leaned in slightly, her voice barely a whisper. "He didn't just have an affair, Jake. He's been involved in something much bigger, something that goes back years. And it's tied to his rise to power. This affair, this betrayal," she paused, taking a shaky breath. "It involves his brother." Jake blinked. "His brother? Elon's brother?" "Yes," Tallulah said, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. "Elon's brother, Kimball. He's been complicit in this dark side of Elon's empire. They've both been hiding something for years, something that, if the public found out, would destroy everything they've worked for." Jake's mind was spinning. Kimball Musk? Elon's younger brother? Everyone knew Kimball had been a part of his business ventures, but no one ever connected him to something like this. What could they have done together that was so damning? What exactly are they hiding? Jake asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Tallulah's eyes flickered with something close to fear. "It's not just one thing, Jake. It's a series of decisions, dark, dangerous decisions, that have led to murder." Jake froze, his blood running cold. Murder? Elon Musk? Murder? It was too much to comprehend. "You're telling me that Elon Musk is involved in murder?" Jake asked, disbelief thick in his voice. "How? Why?" Tallulah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood up and began pacing across the room, her movements sharp and agitated. She was clearly reliving something that still haunted her. "Elon and Kimball were involved in a deal years ago," she said, her voice strained. "They were working with a company that wasn't exactly legal. There were risks. People who got in the way. People who knew too much. She stopped pacing, her gaze locking onto Jake's. They didn't just silence those people. They eliminated them. And I'm not talking about some corporate hit job, Jake. They got their hands dirty. Jake felt his throat go dry. His mind was whirling, trying to keep up with the enormity of what she was saying. This wasn't just about business secrets. This was about something far more sinister. But why hasn't this come out? Jake asked, still trying to piece together the puzzle. How are they keeping this from the public? Tallulah's lips curled into a bitter smile. Because they've made sure it never would. They've covered their tracks. And anyone who's gotten close to exposing them has been dealt with? Jake's heart raced. Dealt with? What the hell did that mean? She locked eyes with him. Jake, if you want to bring Musk down, you're going to have to go much deeper than you ever imagined. It's not just about his image. It's about his past and the people he's hurt. If you dig too deep, you'll become one of those people. The weight of her words sank in, and Jake felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had asked for the truth, but now he realized just how much danger he was in. Tallulah leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. Are you sure you're ready for this, Jake? Because once you're in, there's no getting out. The room felt as though it were closing in on Jake. He could almost feel the weight of Tallulah's words pressing down on him, like a thick fog that refused to lift. Murder? Elon Musk and Kimball Musk involved in something so dark, so dangerous, that it could destroy them both? It was almost too much to comprehend. But here he was, sitting in front of Tallulah Riley, the woman who had been married to Elon Musk, the one who knew more about the Musk brothers than anyone else. She had just dropped a bombshell that could ruin everything. And Jake's instinct was clear. He couldn't walk away now. How do you know all of this? Jake asked, his voice hoarse. His mind was still reeling, trying to process the magnitude of the revelations. Tallulah let out a short, bitter laugh, her expression hardening. I lived it, Jake. I watched it happen. I was there when they started making their moves, when they crossed lines that can never be uncrossed. I tried to walk away, but once you know something like this, you can't unsee it. You can't pretend it didn't happen. Jake swallowed, trying to steady his breath. Why didn't you go to the authorities? Why keep quiet all these years? Tallulah's face darkened, her lips curling into a bitter smile. Because, Jake, you don't understand how deep this runs. The people they were working with, the people they were protecting, are more powerful than you think. There's a network, a whole system of corruption and power that keeps everything in place. If I had spoken up, I would have been silenced. They would have made sure of it, just like they've done with anyone else who's gotten too close to the truth. Jake felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had known Elon Musk was powerful, but this was something else entirely. A shadow network of corruption, one that reached far beyond the realm of tech startups and billion-dollar companies. Jake felt his grip on reality slipping, as if he were suddenly standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into a chasm he couldn't even begin to understand. So you're telling me that the Musk brothers have been involved in some shadow organization? A criminal network? And no one's been able to touch them because of it? Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tallulah nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing. Exactly. And it's not just about power, Jake. It's about control. Elon and Kimball will do whatever it takes to keep their empire intact. And they'll destroy anyone who gets in their way. Jake leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. If this was true, and part of him feared it was, then everything he had been chasing, every lead he had followed, had just become 1,000 times more dangerous. Musk wasn't just an eccentric billionaire. He was part of a much larger, much darker game. How do I stop them? Jake asked, his voice firm, despite the rising fear in his chest. He couldn't back down now. He was too deep into this, and there was no going back. Not when the stakes were this high. Tallulah looked at him with something akin to pity in her eyes. You can't stop them, Jake. Not without paying a price. You don't know what you're up against. These people are untouchable. They have power in places you wouldn't even believe. Politics, law enforcement, the media. They've covered their tracks for years. If you dig too deep, you'll be dragged down with them. Jake stared at her, the reality of what she was saying sinking in. This wasn't just a matter of exposing corruption. It was a fight for survival. You're saying I'm going up against a whole system? A machine, Jake said, his voice low. How can anyone take them down if they're everywhere? Tallulah's eyes darkened as she spoke. You can't. Not alone. But there are others who've tried to fight back. People who've disappeared. People who've been silenced. It's a game, Jake. And if you want to play it, you need to be prepared to lose everything. Jake felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. This was bigger than he had ever imagined. He had come here looking for answers, thinking he could expose the truth, bring Elon Musk down for the world to see. But what Tallulah was saying, it was a death sentence. Then why are you telling me all this? Jake asked, his voice trembling slightly. Why not just walk away? You've already lived through this. You've already escaped. Why drag me into it? Tallulah's gaze softened, just for a moment. Because you asked for the truth, Jake. And I owe it to you. You've seen enough of the surface to know it's not what it seems. But if you really want to go through with this, you need to understand that the price is high. You won't just be risking your career. You'll be risking your life. Jake sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of her words pressing on him. This wasn't a game anymore. There were real consequences, real people who would stop at nothing to protect what they had built. And in the center of it all was Elon Musk, a man whose empire had been built on far more than innovation. It had been built on blood, secrets, and ruthless ambition. Jake stood up slowly, his mind made up. He had come too far to back out now. He wasn't just doing this for the story anymore. He was doing this for the truth, and for the people who had been crushed beneath the weight of the Musk brothers' rise to power. I'm in, Jake said, his voice steady. I'll find a way to bring them down. I don't care what it takes. Tallulah's expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Perhaps it was fear. Or perhaps it was admiration. Just remember, Jake, she said softly, when you're digging through the darkest parts of their world, there's always someone watching. And the deeper you go, the harder it is to get out. Jake met her gaze, his resolve hardening. I know what I'm up against, but I can't back down now. Tallulah nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Then I'll help you. But you need to be ready. Because once you know the truth, there's no going back. Jake turned and walked out of the room, his mind racing with the enormity of what was ahead. This wasn't just a fight for justice, it was a battle for survival. And Jake had no intention of losing. Jake's mind spun as he left the dimly lit building where Tallulah had spilled her secrets. The night air felt colder now, biting through his jacket, but it wasn't just the temperature that made him shiver. It was the weight of what he had just learned. Elon Musk and Kimball Musk, two of the most powerful men in the world, were not just innovators and billionaires. They were players in a much darker game. And Jake had just decided to dive headfirst into that game. He had come here looking for answers, hoping to expose corruption and deceit. But what he had uncovered was more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Murder, manipulation, a web of power that stretched across politics, law enforcement, and beyond. It was too much to wrap his head around. But Tallulah's warning echoed in his mind. Once you know the truth, there's no going back. Jake pulled his collar up against the chill, walking down the quiet streets with purpose. He had a job to do. He couldn't back out now, not when he was so close to uncovering something so big. The night felt oppressive as he made his way to his apartment, his footsteps echoing in the empty streets. He had made a decision. If he was going to take Musk down, he couldn't do it alone. Tallulah had offered to help, but it was clear that she had her own reasons for staying in the shadows. Jake would need allies, people who weren't afraid to fight dirty, people who had the courage to go up against the machine that Musk had built. He unlocked the door to his apartment, the familiar creak of the hinges offering no comfort. The apartment felt small and cramped now, the walls closing in on him. Jake tossed his jacket onto the couch and collapsed into the chair by his desk. His laptop sat there, the screen still open to his latest investigation. Notes, names, and connections that were starting to look like a conspiracy theory gone too far. But what if Tallulah was right? What if this was all real? What if Musk wasn't just a genius entrepreneur with a few skeletons in his closet, but a man who had blood on his hands, a man whose empire was built on manipulation, murder, and fear? Jake couldn't ignore it anymore. He had to know the truth, even if it meant everything he had worked for was at risk. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he had been avoiding for weeks, the only person who could help him now. Max Turner picked up on the third ring. Jake had worked with Max before, back when he was a journalist at the Daily Observer. Max was a former hacker who had turned his skills toward uncovering the darkest parts of the internet. If there were any secrets hidden in the digital world, Max would be the one to find them. But Max had disappeared after some of his investigations hit too close to the truth, and Jake hadn't heard from him in months. "Jake? Is this really you?" Max's voice sounded gruff, as if he hadn't slept in days. "I thought you were done with this stuff." Jake sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Max, I need your help. I've stumbled onto something huge, and I need someone who can dig deeper than I can. I think Elon Musk is hiding something, and it's worse than we imagined." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Jake could practically hear Max weighing his options. Finally, Max spoke, his voice low. "Elon Musk, huh? The guy's got more skeletons than most people would ever guess. But whatever you found, Jake, it sounds like you've gone too far. This isn't just about a bad PR stunt or a corporate scandal. What are you getting yourself into?" Jake's grip on the phone tightened. "I know what I'm getting into, but I can't back out now. I need your help, Max. We need to expose this, whatever it is." Max was quiet again, and Jake could hear him breathing through the phone, clearly thinking. "All right," Max said finally, his tone resigned. "But you're playing with fire, Jake. If this is the real deal, then you're about to open up a Pandora's box. Whatever you're looking for, you better be prepared to lose everything. You won't just be going after Musk. You'll be going after everyone connected to him." Jake felt his heart skip a beat. "I know, but I'm in too deep. I need you, Max. You're the only one who can help me." Max let out a long breath, and Jake could almost feel the weight of the decision on the other end of the line. "Okay," he said finally. "I'm in. But you need to send me everything you've got. We'll need to move fast. The deeper you dig, the harder it'll be to get out. And once we start this, there's no going back." Jake's eyes hardened. "I know, but I'm ready. Let's do this." With Max on board, Jake knew his next move was critical. Tallulah had given him a glimpse of the truth, but it was Max who would help him pull the threads of this tangled web apart. Jake opened his laptop, his fingers moving quickly over the keys as he pulled up everything he had so far. The Musk brothers' connections, the hidden deals, the whispers of power and corruption. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He sent the files to Max, then leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This was bigger than he had imagined. If what Tallulah said was true, then there was far more at stake than a simple exposé. There were lives on the line, and Jake's was one of them. Hours later, Jake sat in his apartment, eyes glued to the screen, waiting for Max's response. The night had dragged on, the silence pressing in around him. It felt like the calm before a storm. Finally, his phone buzzed, and a message popped up from Max. "I found something, but it's worse than we thought. Be careful, Jake. They're watching you." Jake's heart skipped. Watching him? That meant someone had already noticed his digging. Someone powerful. Someone dangerous. The game had just begun, and now it was too late to back out. Jake couldn't sleep. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more troubling than the last. Max's message was still fresh in his mind. "They're watching you." It was a chilling reminder of how deep this went. Someone was already aware of his investigation, someone who didn't want the truth to come out. And if they were watching him, then they were watching everything. Every move, every conversation, every email. He glanced at the clock. Almost 3 a.m. It had been hours since he'd sent the files to Max, but there was no response yet. Jake's fingers hovered over the keyboard of his laptop, his heart racing with a mix of anticipation and fear. He had to keep going. This was his chance, maybe his only chance, to bring the truth to light. But at what cost? Suddenly, the sharp buzz of his phone shattered the silence. Jake snatched it up, almost expecting it to be another warning. Or worse, an anonymous threat. But it was Max. "We've got a problem." Jake's stomach dropped. He quickly dialed Max's number. "Max, what's going on?" Jake's voice was urgent, barely controlled. Max's voice came through, strained. I've been digging through some of the data you sent. And Jake, you were right. Elon and Kimball have been involved in something massive. Something I wasn't expecting. But that's not the worst part. They've been tracking you. Jake froze, his blood running cold. What do you mean, tracking me? They've got eyes everywhere, Jake. They've been monitoring your emails, your phone, and your movements. You've made yourself a target, Max replied, his voice tight with concern. And the worst part? You weren't just being watched. You've already been flagged. They know you're digging into their past. Jake felt the ground beneath him shift. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. He was in the crosshairs of the most powerful men in the world, men who didn't play by the rules, who didn't hesitate to silence those who threatened their empire. What do we do now? Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. His mind was racing, trying to calculate his next move. If they knew what he was after, he was already in danger. Max didn't hesitate. You need to lay low. Stop digging. For now. If you don't, they'll come for you. They'll make you disappear. I don't care how much power they have. They'll find a way. Jake clenched his fists, anger rising in his chest. I can't just stop. Not now. Not after everything I've learned. You know how big this is, Max. This is bigger than us. Max sighed heavily. Jake, listen to me. I get it. But you're not the only one they've been watching. I've been digging too. And it's dangerous. This isn't just about Musk anymore. This goes much deeper. It's global. Jake stood up from his desk, pacing the small room. Global? He had suspected there was more to this than just Musk. But this was a whole new level. Global how? Jake pressed, trying to get a sense of the scope. What are we talking about here? Max's voice dropped to a whisper. It's an international network, Jake. It's not just about business deals or tech startups. Elon and Kimball have been involved in illegal weapons trading, black market technology sales, and underground political deals. This goes beyond anything we thought. And the more you dig, the more you put yourself in their sights. Jake's head spun. Weapons? Black market tech? This wasn't just corruption or a few shady business deals. This was something far more dangerous. These weren't just billionaires. They were part of an underground empire that stretched across borders. Max's voice broke through his thoughts. I've got some info on their contacts, names, dates, deals, but I need more time. I need you to stay safe. I don't know how far this goes, but I'm telling you, they'll stop at nothing to protect what they've built. Jake didn't answer immediately. His brain was working overtime, processing everything Max had just said. Weapons, technology, politics. What had he gotten himself into? I can't stop now, Max, Jake said, his voice firm. You know as well as I do that the truth has to come out. The world needs to know what these people have done. I can't just walk away. Max was silent for a moment. Then be smart, Jake. You can't fight them head-on. Not yet. They're too powerful. But if you keep digging, you better have an exit strategy. And you need to be prepared for them to hit back, and hit hard. The call ended, leaving Jake standing in the dim glow of his apartment, the weight of Max's words settling over him. Hit back. That meant they wouldn't just sit idly by. They had resources. They had connections. And if they felt threatened, they would strike first. The next morning, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He had barely slept, and his mind kept replaying the conversation with Max. How deep did this go? How many people were involved? What would it take to bring down someone as powerful as Elon Musk? He had already made up his mind. He couldn't stop. Not now. But he would have to be careful. More careful than he had ever been before. Jake pulled up the list of names Max had sent him, the ones tied to Musk's dark dealings. He needed to follow the trail. But how far could he go without drawing attention? How could he protect himself while trying to expose the truth? As he sat at his desk, reviewing the documents, a sharp knock at the door broke his concentration. Jake's heart skipped. Who could that be? His pulse quickened, and his instinct screamed that something was wrong. He stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the room. He wasn't expecting anyone, and the fact that someone was knocking at his door this early made his stomach twist with suspicion. Another knock, louder this time. Jake approached the door cautiously, his hand hovering over the handle. He checked the peephole. No one there. The moment he opened the door, a sharp, gloved hand shot out, grabbing him by the wrist and pulling him into the hallway. Jake's heart slammed in his chest as the gloved hand yanked him out of his apartment. He barely had time to react before he was thrust into the cold hallway of his building, the door slamming shut behind him with a finality that left him no room for escape. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. Who were these people? And more importantly, how had they found him so quickly? His mind raced through his options. Fight back? Run? Call for help? His phone was still on the table in his apartment, and he had no time to retrieve it. Max? If this was what he thought it was, Max wouldn't be able to help him in time. This wasn't just some random intruder. This was coordinated. Jake struggled against the hand, pulling him forward, but the grip was ironclad, and the figure remained silent. He could hear soft, measured breathing, a hint of muscle behind the movements. Whoever was doing this, they knew exactly what they were doing. They reached the stairwell at the end of the hall, and Jake's heart skipped. The exit. There was a faint light at the bottom, the street below just a few floors down. If he could break free, he might still make it. He planted his feet, preparing to lunge forward, but before he could act, the person behind him tightened their hold and shoved him into the wall. The impact left his head spinning, his vision blurred for a second, but the force of the blow also gave him a jolt of clarity. This wasn't a random attack. They knew him. They knew exactly what he was after. "You don't get to run, Jake," a gravelly voice whispered from behind him. "Not anymore." Jake's pulse hammered in his ears as the figure's words sank in. He recognized the voice, but it was distorted, too deep for comfort. His instincts screamed that this person wasn't just a thug. They were part of something bigger, something bad. "Who are you?" Jake spat, trying to turn and see his attacker's face, but the figure kept him pressed against the cold concrete, their arm locked around his neck in a chokehold that made it hard to breathe. No time for questions. No time to fight back. His mind scrambled for a way out. He was outmanned and outgunned, but that didn't mean he was done. "Think, Jake. Think." The figure leaned in, their breath cold against Jake's ear. "You should have stopped digging when you had the chance. But now you've gone too far. People like you don't get to make waves in this world. Not when there are so many who don't want the truth to come out." Jake's throat tightened, but he forced himself to speak. "Elon Musk," he rasped, trying to keep his voice steady. "Is he part of this?" The figure's grip on his neck tightened for a moment, almost suffocating, before releasing just enough for Jake to catch a breath. "You're asking the wrong questions, Jake. It's bigger than Musk. Much bigger. And you're not going to get the answers you're looking for. Not alive." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Bigger than Musk? That meant the people behind this were even more powerful than he had imagined. This wasn't just about exposing a billionaire's crimes. This was about survival. Jake's mind raced, trying to think of an escape plan. His legs were still free, just enough to shift his weight. He shifted, trying to twist his body to the side and break free. One good move. One chance. And then, it happened. With all his strength, Jake shoved backward, forcing his attacker off balance for just a moment. He pushed himself forward, breaking free of the grip and spinning around just as the figure tried to recover. In a split second, Jake slammed his shoulder into the figure's chest, knocking them back into the stairwell's railing with a grunt. The figure stumbled but recovered quickly, narrowing their eyes at Jake. "You're more trouble than you're worth," they muttered, reaching for something at their side. A gun. Jake froze, his instinct screaming at him to run, but he was trapped. The figure leveled the weapon at him, their finger resting on the trigger. Jake's heart pounded, his breath coming in shallow gasps. This was it. He had no way out. But then, in a flash of movement, a shadow rushed past him. A blur. Someone else, someone faster, had intervened. The figure with the gun never had time to react before a sharp crack echoed through the stairwell. The weapon flew from their hands, clattering against the concrete as a strong arm grabbed them from behind, yanking them into the shadows. A low grunt, a sharp struggle, and then the sound of a body hitting the floor. Jake stood frozen for a second, unsure of what was happening. Then, from the darkened stairwell, a familiar voice called out, "Move, now." Jake didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran, the adrenaline kicking in as he sprinted toward the street level. His lungs burned with every step, but he didn't dare look back. Whoever had just saved him wasn't playing around, and neither was he. He burst through the stairwell door and out onto the empty street, gasping for breath. The night air hit his face, cold and biting, but the feeling of freedom, of escape, was what Jake needed most. He didn't stop running until he was a few blocks away, his body trembling with the aftershock of the close call. When he finally slowed to a stop, he pressed his hands against his knees, trying to steady his breathing. What had just happened? Who had come to his rescue? Before he could answer the questions racing through his mind, a shadow stepped out from an alley, and Jake's pulse quickened. "Jake," a voice said. Familiar. Calm. "Max." Jake looked up in disbelief. "Max? What the hell? How did you?" Max didn't let him finish. "You don't have time for questions, Jake. You're a marked man now, and we need to move fast. They won't stop. Not after what you've uncovered." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. "You were the one who saved me?" Max nodded, his expression serious. "Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on you. Thought you could use a little help. And trust me, you're going to need a lot more before this is over." Jake shook his head, still reeling. "But I thought you were. You disappeared. I thought you were gone for good." "I was," Max replied flatly. "But this is bigger than both of us. And if we don't stick together, neither of us will make it out." Jake stood up straight, meeting Max's eyes. The reality of the situation was starting to hit him with full force. The game had changed. "All right," Jake said, his voice steady now. "Where do we go from here?" Max looked at him, his eyes hard. "We keep digging, but we do it smart. We don't trust anyone. Not anymore." Jake just got a second chance at survival. But with Max in the picture now, things are about to get even more complicated. Who can Jake trust in this tangled web of danger? What's next in his quest for the truth? Drop your theories below. The alley was dark and cold, but Max didn't seem to care. His eyes darted around as if constantly on guard, his senses sharp, aware of every sound, every movement. Jake followed him, still trying to process everything that had just happened. The attack, the mysterious figure, and now, Max's sudden appearance. "How did you find me?" Jake asked, his voice quiet but edged with disbelief. Max glanced over his shoulder, his face a mask of seriousness. "I've been keeping tabs on you. After our last conversation, I knew things would get worse. People like Musk don't just let this stuff slide. I had to make sure you were safe." He gave Jake a grim look. "Clearly, I wasn't fast enough." Jake swallowed hard, the weight of the night pressing down on him. He had almost died back there. In a strange way, Max's appearance was a relief, but it also raised more questions. "Why the hell didn't you tell me you were watching me?" Jake's frustration bubbled over. "I could have used your help earlier." Max's lips curled into a tight, humorless smile. "Would you have listened, Jake? Or would you have kept digging into something you weren't ready for?" Jake didn't have a reply. Deep down, he knew Max was right. He had been stubborn. But the truth, whatever it was, had been calling to him for too long. And now, it seemed that every step he took brought him deeper into the darkness. Max stopped in his tracks, turning to face Jake. "All right, enough with the questions. We've got bigger problems. You've uncovered something that goes way beyond Musk, Jake. Way beyond. And whoever these people are, they know you're getting close. We need to move fast. Get the hell out of the city for a while. They're going to be looking for you. Hard." Jake frowned. "Where the hell do we go? Who can we trust?" Max was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "There's someone who can help. Someone who's been working on this for years. But we have to be careful. They don't trust easily. If they think you're a threat, you won't make it out alive." Jake's curiosity spiked. "Who are they?" Max glanced down the alley, then back at Jake, lowering his voice. "Her name is Lydia Hawk. She's a former CIA operative, now a private contractor. She's the one who has all the real intel on Musk's operations, the global network. But the moment you step into her world, you're not just a journalist anymore. You're a player in a game you don't fully understand." Jake shook his head, feeling a mixture of unease and excitement. Great. So, the rabbit hole gets deeper. Max shrugged. You wanted the truth, Jake. It's never going to be easy. But if you're serious about exposing Musk and the others, this is the next step. If you don't get her on your side, you're as good as dead. Jake didn't have time to process all of this. His mind was still reeling from the fact that they were already onto him. Whoever they were. And the chilling thought that kept running through his head was that, with every move he made, he was drawing closer to the heart of something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. All right, Jake said, his voice firm despite the fear coursing through him. Let's find Lydia Hawk. They didn't speak much as they moved through the winding streets, both men alert to the sounds of the night, listening for any signs that they were being followed. The city felt different now, almost claustrophobic, as if the walls were closing in on Jake from all sides. His every step was a reminder that he wasn't just investigating a story anymore. He was on the run. Eventually, they reached an old, run-down warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It looked abandoned, its windows boarded up and the metal door covered in rust. But Max seemed to know the place, and without a word, he led Jake toward a side entrance. This is it, Max said, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't ask any questions. Just follow my lead. Jake's mind was buzzing, but he nodded and followed Max through the narrow door. They walked down a long corridor, the floor creaking beneath their feet, the smell of dust and mildew thick in the air. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a door at the far end, and Max knocked 3 times, a rhythmic pattern that seemed deliberate. Seconds later, the door opened just enough to reveal a pair of cold, calculating eyes. The woman on the other side was older than Jake had expected, her face weathered by time and experience. But there was something unmistakably dangerous about her. The way she held herself, the way she sized him up in an instant. You must be Jake. Lydia Hawk's voice was low, but there was authority in it. She wasn't asking a question. She was making a statement. Jake swallowed hard, wondering just how much Max had told her. Yeah, I need your help. Lydia studied him for a moment, her gaze hard and unblinking. Help doesn't come cheap. You better be sure you're ready for what's coming, Jake. He nodded. He was ready. At least, he thought he was. I've been digging into Musk and his connections, Jake began. But it's worse than I thought. It's bigger than him. There's a global network of power, corruption, and violence, and I'm the one who's stumbled into it. I need someone who knows how to deal with this kind of thing, and Max said you're the person for the job. Lydia's expression remained unreadable. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. Global network, huh? She muttered. I've been tracking Musk and his little empire for years. You're not the first to come knocking, but you might be the first who hasn't backed out when things got real. Jake's stomach churned. Things are already real. Lydia raised an eyebrow. That's what I thought. But here's the thing, Jake. If you're going to expose this, if you're going to pull on that thread, you need to know something. There's no going back once you start, and what you find might break you. Jake took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. I'm not backing down. I've come this far, and I'm not going to stop. Lydia studied him for a moment longer before nodding slowly. All right, but don't say I didn't warn you. Max stepped forward. We need access to Musk's network. You have any leads? Lydia turned, walking deeper into the warehouse. I've got leads, but I don't give information for free. If you want to help me, we need to do this my way. Follow my rules, and maybe we'll survive this. Jake exchanged a look with Max, who gave him a nod. They had no choice. If they were going to make it out alive and bring Musk and his global network down, they had to trust Lydia. And now, there was no turning back. Jake felt a cold chill run down his spine as Lydia led them into the dimly lit back room of the warehouse. The walls were lined with computers, monitors flashing in the background, some showing encrypted data, others streaming surveillance footage. It was like stepping into a command center for a covert operation. The air was thick with the hum of technology and tension. Lydia, with her sharp eyes and controlled movements, was clearly in her element. You weren't kidding, Jake muttered under his breath. He'd expected a few old files, maybe a computer or two, but this was something else entirely. Lydia shot him a look. This isn't a game, Jake. This is the real world. where lives get ruined for asking the wrong questions. If you want to bring Musk down and take down the network that supports him, you need to understand what you're up against. Max stepped forward. How do we get started? Lydia's lips curled into a brief, sharp smile. We don't start, we dive in. And you need to keep up. She moved quickly, navigating through the room with the confidence of someone who had been in this line of work far too long. Jake and Max exchanged a glance, following her to a table in the center where stacks of documents were scattered, half-open folders, and printouts of emails. It was a digital and physical landscape of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Lydia picked up a file from the stack and tossed it to Jake. This is Musk's network. The global web of connections he's built over the years, through tech, through private contracts, and through far more shady dealings. There's money, power, and influence at every level. Jake opened the file, flipping through the pages. He was already familiar with some of the names. Billionaire tech investors, powerful politicians, CEOs of large corporations. But the deeper he went, the more disturbing it became. There were mentions of money laundering, illegal arms deals, covert operations, and a disturbing pattern of corruption at every level. Lydia was watching him closely, her arms crossed over her chest. You see what you're dealing with now? This isn't just about one man. Musk is the face, but there are others, people behind the scenes pulling strings. And they will stop at nothing to protect their empire. Jake closed the file, his mind racing. So how do we expose this? This is too big. Too many people involved. Max stepped in. We need leverage. Something solid. Something they can't deny. Lydia nodded. Exactly. And I have just the thing. She pulled up a screen on one of the computers, typing in a series of commands with swift precision. The screen flashed for a moment, then a series of documents appeared, each one more explosive than the last. These are Musk's private communications. These are messages he's sent to his closest associates, his legal team, even politicians he's been influencing. It's not enough to take him down alone, but it's the start we need. Jake leaned forward, his heart pounding. These were the keys to everything. If they could expose this, if they could get this information into the right hands, it would be the breakthrough they needed. But as Jake scanned the documents, one name stood out. Elon Musk's personal advisor. The name was familiar. He had heard it before. A connection in the tech world that had been whispered about in certain circles. And there, in black and white, was undeniable proof of their involvement in a series of illegal deals with some of the most notorious figures in the global underworld. Lydia seemed to notice his focus and leaned in. See something you like? Jake nodded slowly, his mind whirring. This advisor. He's been tied to a series of strange investments. Not just business, something else. This could be it. This could tie Musk to the dark side of the tech industry. Lydia smirked. Told you. These people think they're untouchable, but everyone has a weakness. And this advisor, he's Musk's Achilles heel. Max leaned in, studying the documents. What's our next move? Lydia didn't hesitate. We need to find this advisor. He's the key to everything, and he's got a lot to answer for. I've been tracking his movements for a while, but we've never had enough to pin him down. Jake's stomach tightened. Where is he now? Lydia turned back to her screen. He's in town. A meeting is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at a private estate in the hills. We need to get there before anyone else does. Jake glanced at Max. Tomorrow. We're going after him? Max nodded. We don't have a choice. This is the chance we've been waiting for. Lydia turned to them both, her eyes intense. Get your gear ready. And remember, we're not just going in for a conversation. If we're going to get the answers we need, we'll have to take risks. There's no going back. The next day, Jake found himself driving through the outskirts of town, the sun low in the sky and casting long shadows over the landscape. He was with Max and Lydia, the tension in the car palpable. They were on their way to the estate where Musk's advisor was supposed to be meeting someone. A deal was going down, and they needed to be there to see it all. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something much larger than they had anticipated. The stakes were too high. He had already seen what Musk and his associates were capable of, and if this advisor had the kind of power Lydia hinted at, this meeting could very well be a trap. But there was no turning back now. They arrived at the estate in the early evening, The mansion perched high on a hill, isolated from the surrounding town. It looked like the kind of place someone would go to disappear. Private, heavily guarded, and full of secrets. Max, ever the strategist, pulled the car into a hidden spot in the woods nearby. We'll approach from the back. Stay low, stay quiet. I'll take the west side. Lydia, you take the east. Jake, you stay with me. Jake wasn't thrilled about being the rookie in this operation, but he trusted Max and Lydia. They knew what they were doing. At least, that was the hope. He nodded silently as they got out of the car, the air growing colder as they moved toward the estate under the cover of darkness. The security surrounding the estate was tighter than Jake had anticipated. Guards patrolled the perimeter, and there were cameras everywhere. Lydia had been right. This was a high-risk operation. But they had come this far, and Jake knew they had no choice. They crept through the shadows, their movements silent, their breaths shallow. The closer they got to the mansion, the more Jake's nerves tingled with the sense that something wasn't right. The silence in the air was suffocating as Jake, Max, and Lydia moved through the trees toward the back of the estate. The mansion loomed ahead like a giant fortress, its windows glowing with warm light, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled in the night air. Despite the distance between them and their target, Jake felt a growing sense of unease, the kind of feeling you get when you're walking straight into a trap but can't turn back. Max, ever the calm one, signaled for them to stop just short of the rear entrance. He motioned for Lydia to take position on the left side of the estate. She nodded without a word and slipped into the shadows, moving as stealthily as a cat. Jake stuck close to Max, trying to control the growing knot in his stomach. "Stay close," Max whispered, his voice low but steady. "We're not here to play nice. Keep your eyes open." Jake's grip tightened around the flashlight in his hand. His mind was racing with 100 different scenarios. What if they were already waiting for them? What if this entire operation was a trap to catch them in the act? What if they weren't ready for what they'd find? They reached the back of the mansion, where a small door led into a service corridor. Max pushed it open silently, the creaking of the hinges almost making Jake jump. They slipped inside, the darkness inside the corridor swallowing them whole. The place smelled like old wood and stale air, and the faint sound of voices carried from somewhere deep within the house. Max gestured for Jake to follow him, and they crept forward. The voices were getting louder. It was the advisor. They were close. Max paused at the corner of the corridor, signaling for Jake to stop. He peered around the corner and motioned for Jake to do the same. From their vantage point, they could see into a large, opulent room. Luxurious furniture, gold-framed paintings, and the faint glimmer of expensive liquor on a polished wooden table. At the far end of the room, seated across from each other, were two men. One of them was the advisor. Jake recognized him immediately from the photos and documents Lydia had shown them. His face was sharp, calculating, and it was clear from the way he carried himself that he was someone who thrived on control. The other man, he was unfamiliar to Jake, but his presence was undeniable. His posture was rigid, his movements tense, like a man who was used to calling the shots. His suit was impeccable, and his eyes glinted with a cold, predatory intelligence. He was someone who didn't need to speak much to command respect or fear. Jake's breath caught in his throat as the two men exchanged words, too quiet for him to hear from this distance. But from the look on their faces, Jake could tell that whatever they were discussing was serious. And it was obvious they weren't alone in their plans. Their conversation was clearly about something big. Max's voice was barely a whisper. "We need to get closer. This is the moment, Jake. Don't screw it up." Jake nodded, his pulse racing. He was so close to getting the answers he'd been hunting for. Answers that could bring down not just Musk, but an entire global network of power that had been operating in the shadows for years. They moved, slowly, carefully, until they were close enough to the door leading into the room. Jake could now hear snatches of the conversation. "You think the Russians will honor the deal?" The advisor's voice was low, but it was unmistakable. "Does it matter?" The other man replied, a cold chuckle escaping his lips. "We control the tech. We control everything. Once the deal is done, Musk's empire will grow exponentially. We'll be untouchable." Jake felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This was it. They were talking about something huge, something that would change everything. Before Jake could take a step forward to listen more closely, Lydia's voice came through his earpiece, sharp and urgent. "Jake, Max, get the hell out of there now. It's a trap. They know you're here." Jake's stomach dropped. A trap. He whirled around, his mind scrambling to process Lydia's words, but it was too late. The door behind them slammed open with a deafening bang, and in the blink of an eye, a group of armed men flooded the corridor, their guns aimed directly at Jake and Max. Max pushed Jake behind him instinctively, his face hard as stone. "Get ready. We fight our way out." But before either of them could move, the voice of the advisor rang out, calm but filled with menace. "Don't bother. You're not getting out of here alive." Jake's heart skipped a beat as he turned to face the man who had been pulling the strings. The advisor stood in the doorway, flanked by two of his armed guards, his smirk cruel and confident. "You've been poking around where you don't belong," the advisor said, his voice cold. "And now, you've crossed the line." Max took a step forward, his body language defensive but calculating. "You should have stayed out of our way. We've got everything we need to take you down." The advisor's smile only deepened, as if he found the threat amusing. "You think you can expose this operation? That you can bring down Musk and his empire? You're nothing but flies in the web we've spun." He paused, his eyes flicking toward the armed men. And flies always get swatted. Jake's thoughts were racing, and panic clawed at him. How had they found them? What was going on? This wasn't just a simple ambush, it was a message. "We don't have time for games," Max growled. "If you want to fight, you'll get one." But the advisor raised his hand, signaling his men to hold fire. "Not yet," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "You see, you've made a grave mistake. But I can offer you a choice. Walk away now, and you'll get to keep your lives. Push further, and I'll make sure you never breathe again." Max tensed, and Jake could feel his pulse thundering in his ears. This was it. They were at a crossroads. The decision they made here would determine everything. Suddenly, Lydia's voice crackled in his earpiece, sharp and cutting through the tension. "Jake, Max, now's your chance. Get out. There's an escape route by the east wing." Without thinking, Jake reacted. He grabbed Max by the arm and pulled him toward the hallway. "Now, Max. Let's go." They ran. The sounds of boots pounding against the floor echoed in the distance, and Jake could hear the thudding of his own heartbeat in his chest. The escape route Lydia had mentioned was their only shot, but as they turned the corner, they realized the corridor was blocked, the advisor's men ahead of them. Max didn't hesitate. "This way," he barked, veering off to the left toward a small, hidden door. They burst through the door and into a narrow stairwell that led them down toward a back exit. Jake could feel the weight of the moment. This was their chance to escape. But just as they reached the bottom, the sound of footsteps behind them made Jake freeze. The advisor had made sure they wouldn't get away so easily. The cold stone of the stairwell seemed to close in around Jake as he and Max descended into the depths of the mansion. His breath was ragged, and his heart pounded in his ears, but the footsteps behind them grew louder. The advisor's men were closing in fast. This wasn't just a chase anymore. It was a countdown. Every second they stayed in that mansion, the closer they came to being caught. Max shoved open the door at the bottom of the stairs, and they burst into a narrow hallway. It was dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of old stone and dampness. There were no windows, no signs of escape. But they didn't have the luxury of time to wonder where they were going. The sounds of their pursuers were growing closer. "Keep moving," Max barked, pulling Jake toward a small door on the far wall. The door didn't look like much, old, rusted, and likely forgotten, but Max was certain it led to an exit. The only exit that might still be clear. As they reached the door, Jake heard a loud crash from behind them, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing in the confined space. The men were almost there. They were cornered. "Move," Max shouted, and with a twist of his hand, the door creaked open. They were met with the cool night air, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat inside the mansion. Jake didn't hesitate. He bolted through the door, his feet pounding the gravel pathway as he tried to keep pace with Max. The estate loomed behind them like a beast that had just been disturbed from its slumber, its shadow stretching long over the yard. But they weren't out yet. The sound of vehicles revving in the distance reached their ears. Cars. They were being pursued. Jake's mind raced. The only way they were going to make it out of here was if they took a risk, a big one. "We need to get to the woods," Jake gasped, pointing toward a dense thicket on the far side of the property. "If we can make it there, we might have a chance." Max didn't argue. He simply nodded and led the way, pushing through the darkened grounds with a speed that seemed impossible. The trees were close now, their gnarled branches bending in the night air like silent sentinels. But the crunch of gravel and the sound of engines revving told them their time was running out. A car engine roared behind them, cutting through the night like a knife. One of the guards had already reached the gates and was speeding toward them. "Move, move," Max shouted, increasing his pace. The woods were almost within reach. Jake could see the first line of trees ahead, their dark silhouettes against the pale moonlight. But just as they neared the edge of the forest, the first car turned the corner and screeched to a halt, blocking their path. Jake's heart raced as the car door swung open, and two armed men stepped out, weapons drawn. The driver's side door opened, and the advisor himself stepped out, his expression calm and calculating. His gaze swept over Jake and Max with cold amusement, as if this was all part of the plan. "Thought you could escape, did you?" The advisor's voice was smooth, mocking. "This is where it ends, gentlemen." Max reached for his gun, but before he could draw it, the sound of a second vehicle echoed behind them. Jake's pulse spiked as he turned to look. A sleek black SUV screeched to a stop, and the door opened. From the shadows, a tall figure stepped out, his face obscured by the darkness. But Jake knew immediately who it was. It was Musk. Elon Musk, the man who had been at the center of everything. The man whose empire they had risked everything to bring down. He didn't need to say a word. His cold, calculating gaze was enough to send a shiver down Jake's spine. Musk's presence made everything feel more real, more dangerous. And just like that, the game had changed. "You really thought you could take me down?" Musk said, his voice low and confident. "You're amateurs, and now you're in way over your heads." Max stood his ground, his gun still in hand, but Jake could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They were outmatched, outgunned, and with Musk standing there, surrounded by his men, the chances of getting out alive were slim. Musk glanced over at the advisor, who had a smug grin on his face. "You've done well. I'll take it from here." The advisor gave a small bow, and without another word, he and his men began to retreat toward the vehicles. They were leaving. Jake's mind was spinning. What the hell was going on? But before he could process it, Musk took a step forward, his eyes fixed on Jake and Max. "You've been a thorn in my side for long enough. But you're not going to stop me. Not now, not ever." Max stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "We're not done yet, Musk. You think this is the end? You've got no idea what's coming for you." Musk didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at Jake, almost as if inspecting him, sizing him up. "You're brave, I'll give you that. But bravery alone won't save you. I own everything. You are nothing." Jake felt the weight of those words. Nothing. It hit him like a punch to the gut, but it also sparked something inside him. Rage. The more Musk spoke, the more Jake realized how far this man had gone to protect his empire. Musk wasn't just dangerous. He was a monster, manipulating everyone around him for his own gain. And that realization made Jake more determined than ever. "Don't underestimate us," Jake spat. "We'll find a way. We'll take you down." Musk only chuckled, his eyes cold and calculating. "You have no idea what you're up against. But keep trying. It'll make the fall that much sweeter." With a nod to his men, Musk turned and walked back to his vehicle, his guards closing in around him. The car doors slammed shut, and with a screech of tires, they sped off into the night, disappearing into the distance. Jake and Max were left standing in the quiet, their bodies tense, their breaths ragged. But deep down, Jake knew this wasn't over. It couldn't be. Not when they were so close. Not when they had Musk's empire in their sights. "That was just the beginning," Max said quietly, his voice unwavering despite the defeat. We'll get him. We'll expose everything. Jake nodded, his heart still pounding. The road ahead was more dangerous than ever. But one thing was clear. They weren't going to stop. They had to keep fighting. The night air was colder than Jake had expected as he stood silently in the shadow of the trees, watching the dust settle after Musk's convoy had disappeared down the long road. Every inch of him screamed for action, but there was nothing but the echo of their footsteps in the stillness, a hollow reminder of the chase that had just unfolded. Max stood beside him, equally silent, his eyes scanning the horizon as though hoping for a sign, a spark of opportunity. Jake knew one thing now: they couldn't stop. The battle was far from over. Max finally broke the silence. His voice was steady, but there was a hardened edge to it. You know what Musk's doing, right? He's playing us. But he's not the only one in the game. Jake turned to him, confusion flickering in his chest. What do you mean? We've got nothing now. Musk knows we're after him. We can't just walk into his headquarters. Max's expression remained unreadable, his gaze unwavering. You're right. We can't just walk in. But we can make him think we're out of the picture. We need to disappear for a while. Let him think he's won. Jake furrowed his brow. And then what? Let him build his empire unchallenged? You're talking about retreating? Max's lips twitched in the faintest of smiles. No, Jake. I'm talking about strategizing. If we disappear, he'll think we've given up. It'll give us the perfect chance to set the stage for our next move. We need to learn everything about him. The tech, the people, his entire operation, and we need time. Jake could feel a spark of hope flicker inside him. It wasn't the first time he had felt cornered, but it was the first time he felt like they could turn the tables. All right, but we don't have time to waste. We have to move fast, Jake said, his voice resolute. Max nodded. First things first, we get off the radar. Let Musk think we're running scared. Then we make our move when the time's right. They spent the next few days in the shadows, executing the kind of careful, meticulous planning that only people with nothing left to lose could do. Their first step was simple: vanish. Jake used his tech knowledge to hack into various databases, creating false trails that made it look like they'd fled the country. Meanwhile, Max reached out to trusted allies, including Lydia, who had been invaluable in helping them get information on Musk's global dealings. Their mission was now twofold: gather intel and disrupt Musk's operations at the roots. Max didn't waste any time. The world of finance was one of the most lucrative sectors for Musk's empire, and Max knew that if they could disrupt the flow of money, it would be a massive blow to Musk's operation. They hacked into one of Musk's secondary accounts that funneled billions of dollars into his research labs. It wasn't just about draining the funds. It was about sending a message. His empire is built on money, Max explained. Take that away, and the whole thing crumbles. Jake couldn't help but admire Max's precision. They worked in tandem, with Jake using his skills to dig deeper into Musk's technological secrets, while Max used his network of contacts to spread the information they needed to destabilize Musk's alliances. But there was one problem. Despite everything they did, Musk was always one step ahead. They'd managed to cripple one of his major funding sources, but the next day, Musk's security systems were tighter than ever. It was clear. Musk was on high alert. The tension between Jake and Max was palpable. Every time they made progress, they encountered a new obstacle. Musk's network had grown beyond what they could have imagined. This was no longer a fight against one man. It was a war against a global, near-invisible empire. But in every crisis, there was opportunity. It wasn't long before Jake discovered something that could give them the upper hand. A meeting, a high-level summit Musk was attending in Switzerland. The meeting was to take place at one of the world's most secure locations, a private estate nestled in the Swiss Alps, surrounded by miles of forest and protected by some of the most advanced security systems money could buy. This was their shot. Jake knew that if they could infiltrate the summit, they could expose everything, the full extent of Musk's operation. If they played their cards right, they could destroy his empire once and for all. But it wouldn't be easy. There were layers of security, an army of bodyguards, and the constant surveillance of an organization with resources that reached into every corner of the globe. Jake and Max spent the next several days preparing for the final operation. They studied every detail of the summit: the location, the security systems, the personnel involved. They went over the plan 1,000 times, refining it until it felt like they were ready to execute it flawlessly. But nothing ever goes according to plan. The day of the summit arrived. Jake and Max were in position, hidden within a network of tunnels beneath the estate. They had managed to slip through undetected, thanks to their meticulous planning and careful use of fake credentials. They blended in, their faces obscured by dark glasses and nondescript clothing. Their goal was simple: find the main conference room, access the classified data, and expose everything. They knew that if they were caught, it was over. Musk's men would show no mercy. As they moved through the corridors, the weight of what they were doing pressed down on them. Each door they passed led to deeper, more secure areas. They could hear muffled voices and footsteps echoing in the halls, but the facility was still eerily quiet. It felt almost too easy. Jake's gut told him something wasn't right, but he pushed the feeling aside. They had a job to do, and there was no turning back now. They reached the control room. It was guarded by two men, standing motionless, their eyes scanning the hallway. Without hesitation, Max slipped past them, using a small, silenced dart gun to incapacitate both guards in an instant. They moved quickly, sliding into the control room undetected. Jake began his work at once, accessing the secure files. It wasn't just financial data they were after anymore. They needed everything: plans, blueprints, the scope of Musk's involvement with governments, corporations, and world leaders. It was all there, buried beneath layers of encryption, but as he worked, his heart skipped a beat. There, buried in the files, was something he hadn't anticipated. Musk wasn't just funding technological advancements. He was building something that could change the balance of global power. Musk had weaponized his tech. He had created something so advanced that it could not only control industries, but entire nations. Jake's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about money or power. It was about control on a global scale. "We need to get this information out now," Jake said, his voice urgent. "This is bigger than we thought." Max nodded, eyes wide with realization. "We exposed this. Musk is finished." But before they could react, the door behind them slammed open, and a team of armed guards flooded into the room. The trap had been set. There was no time to think, no time to plan. Max grabbed Jake's arm. "We need to fight our way out. Now." Gunshots rang out as they took cover behind the control panels. Max fired back, each shot precise, while Jake quickly retrieved the flash drive containing the data they had stolen. They were outnumbered, but they weren't backing down. "We're getting out of here," Jake shouted over the gunfire, adrenaline surging through his veins. The battle that followed was a blur: chaos, violence, and the deafening roar of weapons discharging. But against all odds, Jake and Max fought their way through the estate, out the back entrance, and into the forests beyond. As they ran, Jake could hear the sound of Musk's men shouting, but they were too far behind. They had escaped with the most critical piece of information they needed. Everything Musk had built was now exposed. In the days that followed, the world learned the truth. The files Jake and Max had stolen were broadcast globally, exposing Musk's true plans: a vast network of manipulation, power, and control that spanned continents. Governments, corporations, and the tech world reeled from the revelations. Jake and Max, now living in the shadows, had accomplished what no one thought possible. They had brought down the most dangerous empire of the 21st century. But the fight wasn't over. The world was a different place now, and in the quiet moments, Jake knew that as long as there were powerful men like Musk, the battle for justice would never truly end. It's over, but is it really? The final blow has been struck, but Jake and Max's mission has changed the world. What's next for them? Let us know your thoughts on this epic conclusion.